The story of the Pygmalion Effect starts in 1963 when psychologist Robert Rosenthal and elementary school principal Lenore Jacobson wondered if teachers' attitudes or beliefs about their students actually impacted the students' behavior and performance in their classes. So they created a really interesting study. They took a group of students and they gave them all IQ tests. And then they took the results of those tests and distributed them to the teachers. Essentially, 80% of the students were labeled as having average IQs. And then 20% were listed as people that had the potential to bloom over the next year. So the teachers took that knowledge, they said thank you, and then went about their way teaching and developing these students like they normally would. And then 8 months later, the researchers came back and retested all of the students' IQs. And what they found was the students that were labeled as average performed in an average way. And that 20% that were labeled as bloomers, they did bloom. Their IQs grew significantly in comparison to the average group. So the teachers did their job. They leaned into the potential and got the most out of their most talented students. Oh, but there's a catch. The students were put into those groups at random. It was the teacher's beliefs about whether or not a student had high potential or average potential that influenced their approach to teaching and then had an impact on the student's eventual performance. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, it's important for me to say here that the psychological mechanism behind the Pygmalion Effect is true whether or not we're talking about something positive or something negative. So, for example, if a teacher thinks a student is talented, then it will impact their treatment of the student in a positive way. But if a teacher thinks a student is a poor performer for whatever reason, then it will negatively impact that teacher's interaction and lead to a poor performance. So the implications are clear. Teachers should be aware of their biases, and they should work intentionally to treat every student the same. So the problem is, that's what everybody does. That's what everybody thinks they do. If you were to go survey teachers right now, I guarantee you that they would tell you that they make a concerted effort to be as objective as possible in their treatment of their students. So if that was the end of the story, this would not be a very interesting video. It's interesting because there are a ton of data points showing us that teachers do treat students very differently as a consequence of bias. One of my favorite studies came out of Yale by a researcher named Walter Gilliam. Gilliam and his team went to a teachers conference and took at random a bunch of very tenured teachers. I think the average tenure was 11 years. Pulled the teachers in and said, I want to learn about how you identify negative behavior or challenging behavior in kids. So he brought the teachers in and one by one had them look on a laptop and watch students interacting. There was 12 different clips. Every clip was 30 seconds long of the same students interacting in a circle. One white boy, one black girl, and one white girl. And the teachers were just to watch and identify challenging behaviors. Now, across all of the videos, there were no challenging behaviors taking place. Instead of actually looking at the identification of challenging behaviors, the researchers were looking at the eye movement of the different teachers. And what they found was there was a distinct difference in where the teachers were looking. The teachers weren't looking at the girls. The teachers were looking dramatically more at the boys, and in particular, at the black boys, which tells you something, right? It tells you that these teachers, whether or not they want to be biased, when they're looking for negative behaviors, they're looking at young black boys and then next, young white boys. So then ask yourself, does that impact the way young boys are seen at school, the way they are punished at school, and the way that they see themselves? Imagine if you have a child that is constantly being called out for their negative behaviors. What does that do for the way the child sees themselves? I think it could have a devastating effect. Just like believing a child has an exceptional IQ and the potential to grow, if a child believes that they are always making behavioral mistakes, they are likely to engage in poor behaviors in the future. Now here's my point. This Gilliam study is not an isolated study. There are hundreds, literally hundreds of studies that show that the way that teachers interact with students from different backgrounds is different. And I'm not just picking on teachers. This is true in corporate America. It's true at home with families. It's true in social circles. People have biases, and it dramatically influences how they interact, and as a consequence, can dramatically impact how people show up in the world day to day. So practically, it's not enough for our teachers or any of us to just say, I'm gonna work to be unbiased. We all need to look at ourselves and figure out what are the biases that could potentially drive our behaviors. and then work to eliminate that bias, work to change the behavior. So there it is. I did what everybody does. I created this sort of argument that there's a problem, and then my solution to it is this amorphous, vague, we need to be really intentional about figuring out what our biases are. But I didn't tell you how to do that. And then I said, you need to be deliberate about changing your behaviors. And I also didn't tell you about that. The reality is that most people are well-intended when it comes to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we don't actually know how to do it. So for example, if you think about this idea of figuring out what my biases are, that is a lifelong journey. That is me being deliberate every time I'm interacting with somebody different and checking in to see how I feel about them. That is me looking at my history and auditing my behavior. That's me consulting people and asking for feedback and guidance. That's me testing my views and perspectives. That's me searching for information in different sources than I typically receive the information. That's right, it is a big deal. And it's the same thing when it comes to changing my behavior. It's not easy to just go and adjust the behavior or prevent a bias from leaking in. There's no doubt, invariably, I have biases. And invariably, they are going to influence how I interact with people. So to adjust it, to gain control of that, I have to again engage in a lifelong journey. I'm making the argument here that it's worth it and we should all participate in that journey. But what I don't want to do is contribute to content out there that makes it seem like it's just increase your awareness and make some adjustments and no big deal. So that's how I view it. Let me know what you think in the comments below.